You know what's truly powerful, that moment when you stop chasing someone who keeps running, when you finally realize that love, connection, and peace can't exist in a one-sided pursuit. There comes a day when you decide that your energy, your kindness, your time are not gifts to be handed out endlessly to someone who refuses to receive them. That's the day everything changes. When you're dealing with an avoidant person, someone who fears closeness, who craves freedom, but runs from intimacy, you often spend your time proving your worth. You try to show them that you're safe, that you'll love them no matter what. You think if you're patient enough, kind enough, they'll finally meet you halfway. But here's the truth, as long as you keep rescuing them from discomfort, they'll never learn the value of connection. Avoidant people often thrive on control. They need space, they need distance, and they test how much you'll tolerate before you walk away. And you stay because you hope love will melt their walls. But love without boundaries becomes self-sacrifice. The moment you stop being available emotionally, mentally, physically, you flip the script. Suddenly, they have to face what life looks like without your warmth, without your patience, without your constant understanding. You stop being their emotional safety net. You stop replying instantly. You stop explaining yourself. You stop waiting for them to change. Instead, you begin changing yourself not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. And that self-respect sends a message louder than any words ever could. Because when your energy is no longer accessible, it forces them to confront the truth. Distance doesn't feel so safe when love disappears from the equation. The power isn't in punishing them, it's in remembering who you are. You were never meant to convince someone to love you. You were meant to share your heart with someone ready to hold it. So when you step back, it's not rejection, it's redirection. You stop chasing people who can't meet you and start walking toward the peace you deserve. That's when everything changes, not because they suddenly wake up, but because you do. You remember that your value doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from knowing when to choose yourself. When you stop seeking validation from someone who avoids closeness, you reclaim your emotional strength. It's one of the hardest truths to accept that sometimes the person you want most is the one who makes you feel the smallest. You try to show them your worth, to prove that you're safe, kind, and understanding. You soften your tone, hide your needs, and adjust your energy to make the connection work. You tell yourself that patience is love, and that if you just hold on a little longer, they'll finally let you in. But in that process, you begin to lose sight of yourself. Every time you silence your needs for the sake of keeping the peace, you teach them that your feelings are negotiable. You start giving from emptiness, hoping that your consistency will one day be appreciated. Yet the more you try to reassure someone who's afraid of intimacy, the more they pull away, not because you're unworthy, but because avoidance feeds on control. Avoidant individuals often feel safest when they're emotionally distant. They crave connection but fear losing themselves in it. So when they sense that you're trying harder, they retreat to regain control. The pattern becomes predictable. You reach out, they withdraw. You express love, they go silent. You start thinking if you change your approach, less emotion, more patience, less vulnerability, they'll finally stay. But the truth is, every attempt to please them only confirms their belief that they can keep you without giving much back. This cycle keeps you emotionally trapped, seeking approval from someone who's not capable of giving it. You end up feeling anxious, exhausted, and invisible. The turning point comes when you realize that love isn't about convincing someone of your worth. It's about standing firm in it. The moment you stop explaining, proving, or performing, you begin to shift the balance of power. You no longer chase after half-hearted attention or breadcrumbs of affection. You stop settling for mixed signals and emotional distance. Instead, you start showing yourself the love you've been trying to earn. You begin to rebuild trust within, learning that your value was never dependent on someone else's capacity to see it. This is where your strength returns, not in trying harder to be loved, but in walking away from what keeps you unseen. Self-respect is the quiet force that says, I deserve reciprocity. It's the calm decision to no longer participate in emotional games. It's choosing not to beg for communication, not to explain why you're worthy, not to shrink your feelings to fit into someone's comfort zone. It's realizing that the kind of love you crave cannot be built on avoidance, and that peace comes from presence yours, not theirs. And when you finally stop seeking reassurance from someone who fears connection, you free yourself. You take your energy back, you stop proving, and you start being. That's the moment you rediscover the confidence and calm that come from choosing yourself. Distance isn't punishment. It's a mirror that forces others to face the consequences of their avoidance. When you finally step back from someone who continuously withdraws or keeps you at arm's length, you create space not out of anger but out of clarity. For too long, you may have been the one reaching out first, patching the silence, or making excuses for their behavior. You tell yourself they just need time, that they're not ready, or that their past has made them this way. But the truth is, when you constantly close the gap, they never have to. They learn that you'll always be there to repair what they break, to bridge what they avoid. And as long as you keep doing that, they'll never feel the weight of their absence. When you pull back, something powerful happens. Your silence becomes a reflection. It shows them what life feels like without your effort, without your consistency, without your emotional investment. Avoidant people often believe they can keep control by keeping distance, but they only believe that because you've been the one making the connection work. They've never truly experienced what it's like when you stop showing up. That distance becomes a mirror, one they can't look away from. It reveals how one-sided things were, how much you carried, and how little they contributed. For the first time, they are forced to see themselves without the buffer of your understanding. This isn't about playing games or withholding affection. It's about honoring balance. Relationships can't thrive if one person is constantly reaching while the other is constantly retreating. By stepping back, you stop enabling avoidance. You show that connection requires mutual effort, not just one person doing all the emotional heavy lifting. The distance gives them a choice. Either they confront their patterns and move toward growth, or they stay stuck in solitude. Either way, you've freed yourself from chasing what resists you. For many people, the hardest part of creating distance is the guilt. You might fear being seen as cold, detached, or unloving. But distance born from self-respect is not cruelty, it's clarity. It's saying, I will no longer participate in a dynamic where my presence is taken for granted. You're not walking away to punish them, you're walking back to yourself. You're no longer explaining what should be obvious, no longer accepting emotional crumbs when you've offered a feast. When avoidance meets accountability, something shifts. Maybe they recognize the cost of their behavior, maybe they don't, but that's not your responsibility anymore. What matters is that you stopped cushioning the impact of their choices. You stopped being the emotional glue that held everything together, and in doing so, you regained your strength. Distance isn't about teaching them a lesson, it's about remembering your own. It's realizing that stepping back isn't rejection, it's self-recognition. Unconditional giving without mutual effort isn't love, it's self-abandonment. So often, people mistake endless giving for strength. They believe that if they love harder, forgive quicker, and understand deeper, eventually, the other person will meet them halfway. They hold on to the idea that love can heal someone's fears, soften their walls, and bring warmth to their distance. But what they don't see is that every time they pour from an empty cup, they slowly disappear. Love, in its healthiest form, is mutual, a balance of giving and receiving, of showing up and being seen. When only one person is doing the emotional labor, it stops being love and becomes survival. You start giving not out of joy, but out of fear of losing them, fear of not being enough, fear of being alone. When you love someone who avoids closeness, you often take on the role of the fixer. You sense their discomfort, so you adjust. You feel their silence, so you fill it. You notice their walls, so you try to climb them. You become so focused on keeping them comfortable that you forget what comfort feels like for you. You start to measure love by how much you can endure rather than how much you're valued. But love is not meant to be endurance. It's not about proving how patient, forgiving, or strong you are. It's about connection, and connection cannot exist when one person is constantly disappearing to keep the other calm. The problem with giving without boundaries is that it creates imbalance. The avoidant partner learns that they don't have to grow, communicate, or change because you'll always adjust for them. You become the emotional cushion for their avoidance. They withdraw and you wait. They shut down and you understand. They give little and you convince yourself it's enough. Slowly, you start betraying your own needs just to keep the peace. You stop expressing what hurts. You stop asking for more. You silence your voice because you fear it might push them away. But the truth is, if your honesty pushes someone away, they were never ready for real intimacy. Loving without receiving is not compassion, it's self-erasure. Every act of overgiving chips away at your self-worth. You start believing that love is something you must earn through sacrifice. You confuse peace with silence, patience with neglect, loyalty with self-denial. But real love doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't require you to stay small so someone else feels safe. Real love grows in honesty, not in imbalance. It thrives in mutual respect, not in quiet suffering. The moment you realize this, you begin to reclaim your power. You understand that your worth isn't measured by how much you give, but by how you allow yourself to be treated. Love is not losing yourself to prove your devotion. It's standing firm in your truth and inviting someone who can meet you there. When you stop showing up for someone who takes you for granted, silence becomes your most powerful statement. For a long time, you may have believed that words could fix everything, that if you explained yourself clearly enough, expressed your pain honestly enough, or forgave often enough, the other person would finally understand. You believed communication could heal distance, but with an avoidant person, words often lose their meaning because they've learned to tune them out. They hear your pleas as pressure, your needs as demands, your vulnerability as weakness. The more you talk, the more they retreat. The more you chase understanding, the more they disappear into silence. Eventually, you realize that your presence, not your words, has become the thing they take for granted. When someone knows that no matter how they behave, you'll always return, they stop valuing your return. Familiarity replaces appreciation. What once felt like devotion begins to look like availability. They stop showing effort because they know they don't have to. Your forgiveness becomes expected, not earned. Your consistency becomes assumed, not cherished. This is the moment you begin to feel invisible, not because you aren't enough, but because your presence has become predictable. You've been teaching them unconsciously that love doesn't require accountability, but then something changes. One day, you stop explaining, you stop proving, you stop reaching out to bridge the silence. You stop chasing closure from someone who never gave you clarity, and instead, you let your silence speak. That silence is not cold or manipulative, it's dignified. It's a quiet declaration that says, I am no longer available for what hurts me. It's not about punishing the other person. It's about honoring your own peace. You stop feeding a dynamic that leaves you drained, and that stillness begins to restore your strength. Silence has a way of echoing louder than words ever could. When someone is used to your constant reassurance, your absence becomes noticeable. They begin to feel the void not because you're trying to make them miss you, but because they finally experience life without your steady energy filling the gaps. The quiet reveals everything your words couldn't. It exposes the imbalance, the lack of effort, the emotional laziness that words could never confront. Sometimes silence teaches what explanations never can. There is a deep, undeniable power in no longer fighting to be understood. It's a shift from desperation to self-respect. You stop trying to convince someone to care. You stop repeating your worth. You let your withdrawal be the mirror that reflects the truth. Love can't thrive in one-sided effort. And when you choose silence over pleading, you take back your voice in the most profound way. Because your silence is not emptiness, it's strength. It's a boundary that says, I am done explaining what should already be known. Growth begins the moment you decide your peace matters more than someone else's avoidance. For a long time, you may have measured love by how much you could tolerate. You told yourself that patience was a virtue, that understanding their silence was compassion, that staying even when you were hurting was strength. You believed that if you just held on long enough, they would finally see your worth, finally choose you with the same certainty you chose them. But love without peace is survival, not connection. When every interaction leaves you questioning your value, when every conversation ends with confusion instead of comfort, you begin to realize that something deeper is missing. It's not that you're asking for too much, it's that you've been settling for far too little. Avoidant people are often experts at emotional distance. They build walls not out of cruelty but out of fear. They crave closeness but panic when it appears. And because you're empathetic, you try to love them past their walls. You think that if you show consistency, if you give enough space, if you don't pressure them, they'll one day feel safe enough to open up. But the more you try to accommodate their avoidance, the more disconnected you become from yourself. You start tiptoeing around your own truth just to keep the peace. You suppress your needs because you fear they'll leave if you express them. Slowly, your peace begins to erode not because of one big moment, but because of 1,000 small compromises that tell you your feelings don't matter. The shift happens when you decide that your inner calm is not negotiable. When you stop seeing peace as a reward and start treating it as a requirement, everything changes. You begin to choose differently, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You stop chasing validation from people who confuse affection with avoidance. You stop romanticizing emotional unavailability as mystery. You stop calling inconsistency freedom. Instead, you start valuing reciprocity, presence, and ease. You learn that love isn't supposed to feel like anxiety disguised as passion. It's supposed to bring stillness, not storms. Choosing your peace doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying the weight of a relationship alone. It means you're done trying to earn affection from someone who withholds it as a form of control. You begin to realize that your calm isn't selfish, it's sacred. It's the foundation of every healthy connection. Without peace, love becomes chaos. Without balance, affection becomes burden. When you protect your peace, you start attracting relationships that honor it. You begin to see that real intimacy comes from mutual safety, not constant uncertainty. The moment you choose yourself, you start to grow. Growth doesn't come from convincing someone to change, it comes from walking away from what keeps you small. When you value your peace over someone's avoidance, you finally create space for the kind of love that meets you, not the kind that drains you. In the end, real strength isn't found in holding on, it's found in knowing when to let go. When you stop chasing those who can't meet you, you reclaim your worth, your peace, and your power. You realize love isn't about convincing someone to stay, it's about creating space for what's genuine, mutual, and healing. So walk away with grace, hold your head high, and remember choosing yourself is never a loss. It's the beginning of something real. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for having the courage to grow into the person you were always meant to be.